He was signaling that it did not particularly matter what the results of the election were, since he was perfectly comfortable running everything
running in the background
and unrepresented prime minister. Perhaps a taste of what the future of France may look like. Around this time, King Charles decided to invade Algeria. He had some pretext for this, but the pretext doesn't really matter. The real reason is that France lost virtually all of its colonies after its defeat at the end of the Napoleonic Wars, and the king felt that establishing a new colony in Algeria would restore French prestige. I would just ask you, is this a good reason to establish a colony? What would our beloved George Canning say about this? Canning had argued that colonies were only useful so far as they facilitated trade. I don't recall him saying anything about making the king feel better about past humiliations. We'll see this argument made time and time again by mediocre men in the 19th century. They will become obsessed with how colonies look on a map, and then will use the map to justify the policy. But the point of colonies cannot be how they look on a map. The map is an abstraction, a theoretical tool. They're not real. What's real is conditions on the ground. What would the invasion of Algeria do to improve material conditions in France? Nothing. In fact, it was worse than nothing. France would have to send 20% of its army overseas. It was France's second unnecessary invasion in only 7 years. It destroyed France's military readiness for basically no reason. If there was a crisis in Europe, France would find it difficult to respond. It was a risky plan. Furthermore, France didn't really have any money, and this invasion would impose a massive financial burden. Remember, France was still taxing the poor so that they could give money to the rich. Any additional taxes to finance this reckless invasion would be met with hostility. But King Charles and Prime Minister Polignac wanted to do it, so they just did it.
Holy shit.
In 1830, King opened that year's deadlocked legislature by proposing a relatively modest set of programs, but many politicians found the way that he opened the session alarming. He seemed to subtly threaten violence if any of them stood in the way of this legislation. He even hinted that he may act without the approval of the legislature if necessary, describing himself as the true representative of the people, not the elected legislature. It was a real mask-off moment for the king. Even the king's own ultra-conservatives were bothered. A couple of weeks later, the liberal opposition in the legislature were able to gather enough support to push back against the king. They sent a letter to the king and told him that from now on, king's ministers, including the prime minister, must have the support of the legislature. King couldn't just appoint whomever he wished. Elections had to mean something. King Charles was incensed by what he perceived to be a direct challenge to his power. He accused the liberals of trying to overthrow the government. He decided that he could not work these people and immediately dissolved the legislature and called a new election. According to his own electoral reforms, this was 4 years ahead of schedule, but given the current political climate, liberal opposition was likely to get stronger in the short term, not weaker. And so he thought that he would need a friendly legislature to get him through the coming storm. Elections were scheduled to begin in late June. The date was not an accident. The French army was scheduled to land in Algeria in early June, so the thought was that by the end of the month, there would probably be some good news to bolster support for the ultra-conservatives. One politician begged Prime Minister Polignac to keep the legislature in session all the way up until the election because he believed that he could cobble together a small working majority of moderates from different factions. Polignac responded, "A majority? That would really cause me problems. I wouldn't know what to do with it." kind of a shocking thing for a politician to say out loud, but it really shows how Polignac and the king weren't really interested in liberal democracy at all. The ultra-conservative faction was really lost at sea at this point. They only cared about investing more and more power into the king and the aristocracy, and very little about any other people or institutions. Polignac wasn't even particularly interested in popular support. What he wanted to do was make elections no longer matter. We must now talk about Article 14 of France's Constitution, also known as the Charter. History will hang on the wording of Article 14, so let me just give you the whole thing up front. The king is the supreme head of state, commands the land and the sea forces, declares war, makes treaties of peace, alliances, and commerce, appoints to all places of public administration, and makes the necessary regulations and ordinances for the execution of the laws and the security of the state. Let's break it down. The king is the head of the state. He commands the military, runs foreign policy, and appoints all the ministers. That's all very straightforward. But then, there's this funny bit at the end. And makes the necessary regulations and ordinances for the execution of the laws and the security of the state. Regulations and ordinances. That basically means laws, right? And makes the necessary laws for the security of the state. You see what this is, don't you? If the king pressed a giant red button that said, "This is a security matter," he could institute any regulation or law that he wished. Got to decide what was a security matter. The king was a giant loophole in the middle of the French Constitution that could theoretically grant the king unlimited power in the name of security. The king's supporters in the ultra-conservatives began to argue that the unruly liberal opposition to the king was a security matter, and if the upcoming election didn't go in that direction, the king used Article 14 to overturn it. Nobody had ever done anything like this before. Even the ultra-conservatives were split on whether it should be legal. But the ultra-conservatives didn't need to agree. Only the king needed to agree. After some consideration, the king spoke to his closest ministers. If the upcoming election results were not to his liking, he said that he would, quote, make his prerogative respected. The king was not being explicit, but everybody took his one way or another. Liberal opposition would be out of power after the next election. The French army landed in Algeria in early June, and 10 days later they won their first significant victory, all according to plan. On the day that the news of the French victory reached Paris, the king decided to make a big public spectacle of attending Mass, to beef up his religious credibility on the election. As expected, large crowds gathered to catch a glimpse of the king as he made his way through the streets. But there was no cheering, no waving. Crowds just stood there, eerily silent, watching the king like a pack of hungry wolves. Voting began shortly after this, and then wrapped up in the third week of July. The feeling going into the election was that it might be close. It wasn't close. 65% of the legislative seats went to the Liberal and Republican opposition. 32% of the seats went to the king's ultra-conservatives. The rest went to smaller groups that also opposed Polignac's government. A massive victory for the Liberals. The king and his ultra-conservative allies met to decide what to do about the election results. Discussion centered around Article 14 of the Charter. If they argued that the Liberals in the legislature were a semi-treasonous faction, then the king had the authority under Article 14 of the Charter to make the necessary laws for the security of the state. After much debate, the king decided to invoke Article 14 and use it to do 4 things. These would later become known as the 4 ordinances. 1. dissolve the newly elected Liberal majority legislature. 2. Reform the French electoral system and make it pretty much impossible for the Liberals to ever win again. 3. Immediately hold new elections under this new electoral system and allow the ultra-conservatives to win pretty much every seat. 4. Suspend freedom of the press and shut down the liberal newspapers, who the king blamed for his drop in popularity and the unexpected election results. That's right, it was the newspapers' fault, not the 10 years of unpopular policies. King's cousin, Louis Philippe, was not informed that the king was taking this step. He learned of the 4 ordinances by reading about it in the newspaper. Louis Philippe was more friendly to the liberals than his cousin the king was, and when he read what the king had done, told his wife, "They've done it. They've mounted a coup d'etat." Later that day, he hosted a large group of mostly liberal supporters at his home, and quite naturally, the king's 4 ordinances were all anybody could talk about. In front of all these people, the usually careful Louis Philippe lost his composure and shouted, "They're mad! They'll get themselves exiled again!" His liberal supporters urged him to come to Paris and throw his support behind liberal opposition. Louis Philippe told them no, he wouldn't open go against the king. For the time being, he would do nothing. In Paris, the liberal newspapers were not taking this line down. One paper famously wrote, "The legal regime is now interrupted. That of force has begun. In this situation, obedience ceases to be a duty." Later continuing, France must judge how far it ought to take its resistance. They were coming just a hair shy of openly calling for revolution. That evening, soldiers tried to shut down one of the many liberal newspapers that were continuing to operate in violation of the king's new censorship law. This attracted a crowd who began taunting the soldiers with cries of "Down with the Bourbons" and "Long live the Charter." The soldiers tried to suppress the crowd that quickly turned into a riot, with mobs roaming the streets and smashing street lamps. By pure chance, one of these mobs stumbled across Prime Minister Polignac and his Minister of the Navy as they were leaving a cabinet meeting. The mob closed in and started pelting the two with rocks. Politicians narrowly escaped the mob by jumping into a nearby carriage, but not before the Minister of the Navy was badly injured. Somehow, the French Navy managed to lose a battle on the streets of Paris. They really weren't safe anywhere. On July 27th, thousands of soldiers were sent to shut down the liberal opposition newspapers, which led to widespread protests across Paris. First, the soldiers tried to escalate things by charging one of the crowds on horseback, which didn't work. Later, they tried to escalate further by firing indiscriminately into the crowd. 21 were killed and scores were wounded. As the sun went down on a violent day, some new revolutionary slogans were heard in the protests. "Down with the aristocrats! Death to the ministers!" Only 24 hours ago, these had been liberal crowds who had been protesting for constitutionalism and a free press. Now they were revolutionary crowds, and they wanted to overthrow the government. The violence had only radicalized the people. The next day, crowds were significantly larger. The man in charge of defending Paris at this time was Major General Marmont, and he had a hell of a problem on his hands. His garrison in Paris had been hollowed out for the Algerian campaign, and of those that remained, most of the higher-ranking officers had been sent home so that they could vote for ultra-conservatives in the upcoming election. Marmont's garrison was not in any way prepared for what they were about to encounter. At noon, Marmont moved to Paris with the aim of occupying key bridges and public squares where the protests had been the strongest. What they found when they entered the city was totally unexpected. Within the last 24 hours, veterans of the Napoleonic Wars had grabbed their dusty old muskets and gone over to help the protesters. The veterans had each adopted large groups of protesters, and in only a day, they taught them a few tricks. As Marmont's soldiers advanced through the streets, they ran into thousands, yes, thousands, of barricades. These were tall defensive structures built out of ripped-up cobblestones and furniture and wagons and parts of buildings and anything else that the protesters could get their hands on. The taller ones could be 3 meters high, which for the Americans of the audience is approximately, learn how long a meter is high. Quite high. The old veterans instructed the protesters not only to build the barricades, but also to occupy the buildings on each side of the streets approaching the barricades, so that any enemy soldiers would be hit with musket fire from 3 directions. They also loaded up the buildings with cobblestones and roof tiles and other things that unarmed protesters could hurl down at the soldiers. Let's not be cute. By other things, I mean human excrement. As groups of soldiers advanced into the city, they bumped into barricades that hadn't been there last night. When they turned around, they bumped into new barricades that hadn't been there a few hours earlier. It was like being trapped in a maze, but the walls kept shifting, and also somebody kept dumping excrement into it. Marmont had not thought to send his soldiers into the city with supplies, and so the whole garrison spent 8 or more hours covered in filth, frantically marching in circles with no food or water. Morale was at an all-time low. A great many soldiers either surrendered to the protesters or defected to join their cause. As the sun began to set, many of the soldiers had to make direct assaults on the barricades just to escape the city and make it back to camp. Late in the day, liberal opposition opened negotiations with Marmont. They told him that as a precondition to any talks, the king must revoke 4 ordinances. Marmont expressed his sympathy and agreed to take their demand directly to Prime Minister Polignac. The Prime Minister flatly rejected this preliminary demand and told Marmont that there would not be any further meetings with the delegates. Marmont was stunned at his response and decided to take the highly unorthodox step of writing to the king personally. Wrote, "This is no longer a riot, it is a revolution." Continuing, "I think it is urgent that your majesty profit without delay from the overtures that are made to him. The honor of the crown can still be saved. Tomorrow, perhaps it will be too late. I am taking measures to pacify the revolt. The troops will be ready at me, but I await with impatience your majesty's orders." To be clear, this was way out of line. This was a local military officer going around the prime minister so that he could advise the king on political matters. But Marmont was desperate, and nobody above him seemed to be taking the situation seriously. The king wrote back and basically told Marmont to hold steady. Marmont's pleas had fallen on deaf ears. The next morning, Marmont moved back to a defensive position. He wouldn't be tricked into another costly engagement like yesterday. Almost immediately, 15 or 20% of Marmont's 12,000 soldiers defected and went over to join the protesters. In order to fill the holes in his defensive position, Marmont ordered his men to pull back into an even tighter circle, which the soldiers incorrectly interpreted as a retreat, which triggered a chain reaction of even more defections. By noon, the defections were totally out of control, and in order to stem the losses, the king fired Marmont and ordered the garrison to withdraw from the city, turning a false retreat into a real one. The protesters had captured Paris. The whole thing only took 3 days. Old man Talleyrand, who had lost faith in the king and had been helping to guide the liberal opposition from behind the scenes, was perhaps the first person to fully understand the significance of this. As he and his political allies watched the soldiers leaving the city, he took out his pocket watch and declared 29th of July, 5 minutes past midday, the elder branch of the House of Bourbon had ceased to reign. Liberal opposition was blown away at their own success. They had been fighting to overturn the 4 ordinances and squeeze some political concessions out of the king. And now, without even really intending to do so, they had overthrown the monarchy. That evening, King finally tried to negotiate. If he had done that yesterday when Bourbon asked him to, it may have helped. But now it was too late. The liberals controlled Paris, and they got to decide what happened next. Next day, the liberals and their Republican allies were locked in a heated internal debate. Some argued for using their new position to overthrow the entire system.
Oh my god, are you fucking kidding me?
Caution. The other great powers were monitoring the situation in France carefully, and if they caught even a whiff of something resembling the French Revolution, most of them were prepared to march into France to stop it. That's how you get a world war. As if to drive this point home, as the liberal opposition gathered to debate their next move, they could hear cries of "Long live Napoleon" coming from the streets. People were in a dangerous mood. They seemed fully prepared to do the whole French Revolution over again. Although it must be said that the crowd was a little misguided in their sloganeering. Napoleon was dead. He wasn't long living nothing. The liberals finally figured out what their demands would be. They demanded that King Charles be removed from power, and that France transition to a limited constitutional monarchy, kind of modeled after Great Britain. This, they believed, would be just radical enough to satisfy the Republicans and prevent a civil war, but not so radical that it would freak out the other great powers and trigger a world war. The problem was figuring out who to replace the king with. Some of the more radical Republicans suggested Napoleon's 19-year-old son, but that idea was dismissed out of hand. Remember, they were trying to not freak out great powers. Others suggested the king's 9-year-old grandson, Henry, or Henri, I guess. But the mainstream liberals rejected this over fears that the tyrant King Charles would continue to wield power from behind the scenes. They settled on the one person that they could all agree on, the king's 56-year-old cousin, Louis Philippe. The liberal politicians, by far the largest part of the coalition of opposition groups, strongly favored Louis Philippe, as it was widely known that he was a closet liberal. More conservative members of the group felt that they could hold their noses and back Louis, since they could rest easy knowing that the monarchy would survive. The radical Republicans, who were initially pushing for Napoleon's son, also felt that they could hold their noses and get behind. What made Louis Philippe unique was that he had fought with distinction in the Republican Army. It was a big deal to the veterans of the Napoleonic Wars. They had been royalty, but in a way he was one of them. It was also noteworthy to the veterans that even after circumstances forced him to flee France, Louis Philippe never took up arms against his own country. Many exiled aristocrats did. Louis Philippe always refused. That was a big deal. So it seemed that Louis Philippe was the only candidate for king that could unite the liberal, conservative, and Republican factions and prevent a civil war, at least for now. By the evening of July 30th, Louis Philippe was on his way to Paris. It wasn't official yet, but the reign of King Charles X was effectively. When Louis Philippe entered Paris, he was greeted with cries of "Long live the Republic!" This was a bit of a problem. The people of Paris had been radicalized by the violence of the last 5 days. Yes, it had only been 5 days, and they might not be okay with monarchy surviving at all. Louis Philippe had to perform a difficult balancing act. He made an effort to reach out to all of Napoleon's old generals, and made sure to appear with them publicly, alongside symbols of the revolution, like the tricolor flag. He had to somehow communicate, "I am basically on your side." while also making it clear that he was not re-establishing the Republic. His outreach worked. The people of Paris rallied behind, and a couple of days later, Charles X abdicated the throne. The July Revolution was complete. In 1830, France got off lucky. There should have been a civil war, but there wasn't. There should have been an invasion by France's conservative neighbors, but there wasn't. Liberals and their new king, Louis Philippe, somehow managed to thread the needle and preserve peace. Austria was quick to recognize the new government in France. Metternich had been busy behind the scenes, reassuring the great powers that Louis Philippe would be a perfectly acceptable king. And, with him in charge, they had no reason to worry about the July Revolution spinning out of control. He was right. On August 3rd, Louis Philippe reopened the legislature and proposed a set of liberal reforms, including eliminating the loop in Article 14 of the Charter that allowed the king to seize power in the name of security. All of these reforms were popular and they passed easily. The old charter had stated that the king was the sole source of sovereignty. Now, sovereignty was shared between the king and the legislature. Politicians could now write their own legislation without first getting the approval of the king. Ministers were still approved by the king, but now they could be removed by the legislature. The old censorship law was scrapped. The size of the electorate was increased by 75%. It wasn't what Republicans would have asked for. The only people allowed to vote were still a small, wealthy minority, but it was a step in the right direction. 1830 was a turning point for Europe. The liberals pulled off a relatively bloodless revolution in France, but it was also part of a wider trend in Europe of liberals finally rising up against the authoritarian status quo. Portugal, Spain, Belgium, Switzerland, Northern Italy, German Confederation, and Poland all saw liberal uprisings of some kind. Some were successful, some were not, but the larger point is that the post-war conservative order was crumbling, and a new period of liberal ascendancy was beginning. Liberal victories brought about a profound change in the political left in Europe. Before 1830, the moderate liberals and the radical republicans were united in their opposition to the conservatives in power. As the liberals came to power in France and elsewhere, it exposed rifts in their coalition. In the words of Eric Hobsbawm, after 1830, liberalism and democracy appeared to be adversaries rather than allies. Alexis de Tocqueville was a big-time defender of liberal France in the 1830s and viewed the Republican left with a lot of suspicion. He wrote of the split.
Is this an ad?
From the 18th century, there flows two rivers. One carries men to free institutions, the other to absolute power. Liberalism, in his view, brought with it free institutions. Republicanism, in his view, brought with it mob rule and chaos, which naturally led, in his view, to absolute power and emperors. Not only did 1830 split the liberals and the republicans, but it also split the East and the West. Liberalism triumphed over authoritarianism in France, Britain, and Belgium, which meant that Western Europe became a sort of liberal bloc. Portugal and Spain were doing their own thing, but they were so weak and consumed with internal conflict that they couldn't challenge their liberal rulers. Eastern Europe had mostly suppressed their liberal folks, making them a kind of conservative bloc, where monarchies continued to dominate political life. The interesting thing about France in 1830 is that it provides a sobering example of what happens when conservative governments try to freeze out even incremental progress and liberal institutions. This all could have been avoided If, at any time during the preceding 10 years, France had just allowed the Liberals to win an election. That's what elections are. They're release valves. If the Liberals in France could have got into government and passed some reforms, it would have let off enough steam to avoid the July Revolution. But instead of doing that, the French ultra-conservatives in the 1820s sabotaged all of the release valves in order to suit their own short-term aims. Demand for reform reached such intensity that the liberals were willing to do anything in order to achieve it. As a result, King was overthrown, and the ultra-conservatives were swept out of power in France forever. The ultra-conservatives were so hell-bent on preventing any liberal reforms whatsoever that they lost everything. The same factors that produced the July Revolution in France were at work all across Europe. Some governments were overthrown, some were not, but every government had to figure out how to weather the same storm. No country did a better job at weathering the storm. Britain. Why? Because unlike so many of their peer nations, Britain decided to allow their disputes to be resolved through politics. The election of 1830, which was coincidentally called on the same day that the French liberals captured Paris, unleashed the greatest period of legislative productivity in Britain in 100 years. The British liberals accomplished some great things, including something that up until now was thought to be impossible. Something that would change the world forever. They abolished slavery in the British Empire.
Let's take mid boss.
Legal.
push. The Wraith is dead. GG's. Oh wait. GG.
Another update. God damn it. Alright, I'll be right back.
That's really cool. So, I'm pretty sure so you stole it or speculates as well. But it doesn't seem like much from it. It's just that desperate. And also very bothered playing ball. Everyone did. This is sort of a stupid scam. Putting money into a jack fucking just should have access to your money. You need a guardian. You need someone that for you, it shuts down your bad ideas. But you would it be okay? No. That's the crazy. I don't know. The craziest thing is the TikTok probably your 9-year-olds like fed overdose. That's like a total and not bad. It's not regular. It's not. It's still fraudulent scamming. It's still no one's gonna get punched. But since it's not, you're not gonna see Jack it's fucking kids in real life. They should be worried about toys. You know, like the 13-year-old that rugged 3 times in a day for 50 grand. Oh god. It's sad. It's actually sad. I'm sure he's gonna do more of these too. I just have a hunch he's gonna do this. Because it is like a funny right now. It seems like everyone makes something not fun. Is getting tons of suckers to immediately buy in, hoping that they're there early enough where it graduates and they make like a fat bag off it. But it's just not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. Have better odds of murdering. But I know there are a lot of people murdering. Just like there's people that are making tons of money. It's just not going to be. Pumping up in crypto is a moral good scams crypto bros. It's your civic duty and also funny. Wow. Checkmate, actually. I was going to try and have an argument against you, but you're right. The only people on Pump.fun are actually the people observing it. You're actually, wait a minute. You just fucking flambé that. There's mathematically better odds in casino or casinos. I think you have slightly higher odds, but you have to also calculate that everyone on Pump.fun is scamming. Like they are one. So you are not in on that's coming. So you still have to get absurdly much. That's why it's still statistically very unlikely that's outside of the scammer's rate makes money off of fun funds. Why can't it just keep out your experience that are broken? I feel like it's long term more profitable. Scamming seems so dumb. So innocent. That was like a kid asking, why do people do bad things? The reason you rug it is because there is no long-term with a Pump.fun shitcoin is designed to be rugged. They don't have it's there to pump and then take your money out so people are left holding the bag. You can't take little bits and pieces out because then you risk not being the benefactor. They are actually, from a design perspective, there to fail, and you calculate the fail. It's so degenerate. Is Jack going to get jumpsuit? I doubt it, man. Anyone that bought into the Pump.fun probably had their parents' permission to do it. If they wanted to jump Jack, they'd have to talk to their dad to have him drive over there. Otherwise, they have to roll up on the green machine. This runs by making sure all created tokens are safe. Each coin on Pump is a fair launch of no sequel. It's just to cover their own ass. Pump.fun is making so much money they're going to be in the crosshairs of regulators or investigators or something down the line. So they're just doing all they can to legally cover themselves, but the site is literally it's getting a virtual generation of highly skilled and experienced scammers. Nope. Like that 13-year-old, the drug the other day for months. He didn't do anything impressive. On the site, on Pump.fun, I don't know, the site is so fucking ignorant. But
on the site, there's something that says start coin. Click start coin, you can just make your shit token. He didn't do anything besides just click make a coin using whatever fucking protocol was made in there. I have no idea. Launched it and then just streamed, and then people started putting money into it. And he said, "Thanks for the 20 bandos." Left. He came back with, "I'm sorry. Thanks for the 10 bandos." Left. Then came back for Lucy. Another 10 bandos against, and then left. And the experience he gained is that people are fucking idiots. That was the experience he gained. He's not highly skilled. Crazy for my big scamming and probably still believes in Santa. He's gonna try and buy one of the Santa sled. Not satisfied with just one puppet dump on his audience, Jack Torkey did it again. Like King Neptune, he said, "That was so good, I want to try it a second time." So he apparently did another stream on Twitter where he bugged another coin. I can't find that broadcast, so I only have this screenshot to go off of, but you can still see the tweets that he was posting about it for going live. So he clearly was doing a meaningful stream, then deleted some of the tweets, and in the comment section you can see people being very upset that he rugged them again. Shitcoin this time around for Jack was hated. Award being people hate Jack.
Welcome to the home of Jameson. Around here, a little drop of green is really going places. On its way, Jameson Farm. Here, it gets triple distilled into the smoothest Jameson Irish whiskey. Then it's out into the big wide world to find the best of welcomes, even over ice. That's why every drop must be a Jameson.
For good reason. So he immediately drugged it as soon as he could, speedrunning financial crimes with a smile on his face that not even his mother could love. And now, back with the binge that got rugged are now driving the price of heated up really high. Same guy that we saw from the playbook with that 13-year-old rug once after he was out. They drove the market cap through the goddamn big fucking blasted that Zano style order for the kid that made 30K, then in a million fell. So he would have never made it. Didn't rug them, never had that market cap that's done that. It's a secondary scam. So what happened is people got rugged, then they started like parents like, "Hey, we need to get revenge, so we're gonna drive this up," so that they drive it up to get some people to buy in. So the people that got rugged get the fuck out. So that's what they're trying to get Jack. I can't believe he put into his first shit with Claret, let alone the second time. This is the exact same thing that just happened on the same site, the exact same a couple of days ago with Fox, and people are still. And Jack is probably going to do this every single day. And unfortunately, I think it's going to work every single time because for some reason, he's thinking that they are.
low-key do that. I don't know what the fuck that did.
Ah! Ah, no! Fuck, that's fucking man. Oh my god. Really? God damn it.
Can a nigga that gets in help on purple and Total Walker gets destroyed?
Fuck.
I need help on purple.
I got coming.
I'm already fucking dead, so it's pointless.
Shit. Shit.
Our blue walker is under attack. Our blue walker has been defeated.
some help on purpose.
Coming.
Gordon's on green, Yamato's on yellow.
Agitated. I see Yamato. Has been destroyed.
Should go for mid. They're trying to take the urn. You can tell he's retarded because he's specking to his fucking laser rather than anything else.
What? No! What was I doing? Hell are you thinking, man? Shit. Ah. Damn it. Yeah, backlash. Get back, guys. No sense in doing that. Spend green. Spend green.
The spirit urn is waiting to be claimed.
Get back on the guys.
Yeah, buddy. Good game. Good game.